real hot takey kind of night.
You got any of your favorites you want to share? Hot takes?
So now we are back kind of bummed about the roster, as if this isn't like it didn't sneak up on us.
Yeah, it hasn't changed.
Yeah. So you have to be very, very, very careful.
Okay.
Because remember when they were winning and we were like, hey, got to give some credit to kind of the chemistry and kind of the guys knowing their roles and how he put this thing together.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're not yielding the results that we want, we can't go back, or we ought not. Ought not?
Ought not.
Ought not. So then go back and have that be kind of the reason for your treason, right?
Sure.
I mean, I get it. It's fluid, but you really can't have it both ways. So it's like kind of I like to say, you don't get a lot of that life without some of those cast members in it. So the big thing, couple, is they got to manage their way through it. Like you really have to.
Here's my question, though.
You have to really manage your way through it. It better be a good one.
I don't know if it is or not. We'll see.
Well, then maybe you shouldn't ask. Are you sure?
But you're winning.
We'll find out. I think the question people are asking themselves now is, do they want this life?
As fans?
Well, as like with that the roster gives you, right? If you can't have this life without this cast in it.
Okay, what's your alternative, though?
Well, I don't know.
You don't have one.
I mean, not now you don't.
Yeah. So.
But I think that's how people are viewing it in their head, right? They're like, oh, we thought we liked this thing earlier. Maybe it's not what we thought it was, right? This team maybe isn't what people thought it was at one point earlier in the season.
Sounds a lot like fandom.
I mean, it is fandom. That's mostly who we're talking to.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could be talking to you because you're going to have to own it here shortly, too, with Creighton. For as much hand-wringing and bitching and moaning as you did about the roster, and not just you, I mean, people in general that didn't like the roster construction are going to ride this wave down the stretch of you're going to be all in like, oh, okay, like I'm in. Because when we make these sweeping generalizations real time, sometimes we kind of just box ourselves in. Like it can always change, and in the sports landscape and competition, it can change in a hurry. I mean, in a hurry with what's going on in terms of how we look at these conferences, man. I mean, you watch I feel like we watch basketball out every day because of how we interact during basketball games. Like I feel like there's a group of us that are in front of the television.
Oh, yeah,
together,
okay, yeah.
Like watching games
Sure.
out. And I just this morning, because I'm on self-quarantine in my house because it is a grade A debacle. I mean, I've never been so happy for tremendous quad boxes.
It's like World War Z up in there. Just gotta
God.
stay out of here again.
Man. God dang war zone. But the quad boxes have been on fire, right?
Oh yeah, no, they've had good selections.
They've been legit.
Yeah.
And it's like I just was kind of going back through because sometimes I just want a good chuckle, so I try to scroll through and I see what DeMarinis may have said or what you may have said when you clap back or something. And every day, on almost every exchange, and there's hundreds now.
Yeah,
where it's like, I can't believe, and then fill in the blank.
Sure. Or are we sure?
Yep.
Fill in the blank.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So I think we just got to ride it.
I think it is an accurate reflection of this basketball season.
It's
because it's a total crapshoot.
Yeah.
I mean, last night we're watching Xavier St. John's before the Nebraska game, right?
Who gave the laughing emoji to Richmond? Was that you?
I think so.
Yeah. I'm like,
oh,
we were talking about Kadari.
Yeah. I think I just said classic and then laughed at it. Because, like, that's the Kadari Richmond we know and love.
Yeah.
But I think it's an accurate reflection of what this basketball season is, because you've asked the question a couple weeks now. You're like, are we sure St. John's is good? And then DeMarinis goes, hey, maybe Xavier is kind of the team that might be good that we missed, or because they had a stumble early. And I'm like, are we sure either of these teams are good?
Yeah.
Because I'm not. The St. John's is going to win a lot of games, but I don't trust them at all because offensively it is horrifying.
So and the score last night was exactly as I picked it. Not exactly. 1 point off as I picked it the other way. I said 78-72 Nebraska.
Yep.
And it was 78-73 SC.
Yeah.
And as we got up from the table, you're like, hey, are you going to tweet out your picks? I was like, man, I don't know. Like, I like a couple of things. And you're like, oh, what's that? I'm like, I like Northwestern.
Yep.
I like Northwestern. I feel like
and they covered.
That line is bonkers.
Stinky.
Give me the Wildcats. Yep. And I said, the other one, I want to give out Nebraska.
Yeah.
The only reason I hedged, it's because I almost never, ever, ever lock up any team that I know the way that I feel about, like Nebraska.
Yeah, a team you like.
Not just that, because I'll tell you about Carolina.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Just not Nebraska.
Yeah.
Almost because I feel like I know too much.
Yeah, Nebraska and Creighton, for me, Nebraska football, Creighton basketball are the ones I can't.
And I can
cap.
and I'm pretty good with Creighton.
You're really good at Creighton basketball.
Like I
can't cap either of those at all.
But when it comes to Nebraska, I'm just like, you know what?
I just didn't know what to expect.
Like I called a couple of you guys in New York. I'm like, man, Nebraska by 1,000.
Yeah.
Like I felt, and it's rare. Like it only happens to me like a couple of times a year, and sometimes it's to the bad.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'm like,
I don't know.
Ooh, these guys may get rolled.
Yeah.
You know, but even that didn't happen last year.
No. The one that got me, or the thing that got me about Nebraska last night was I don't know where their headspace is at all.
Is it because things happen like with the starting lineup?
No.
Okay. Because I felt like that was kind of the catalyst for
something like
for the negativity of the roster.
Yeah.
Like, we have to start Ulyss. I was like,
you don't have to.
You guys, this is just me in my head. So this is totally another made up child.
You guys.
Just the other day, we were like, oh, man, Ulyss kind of settled it down. If he actually looked like a true point guard. He was the assists guy, and they were good on the road. So why was that going to be like this? Didn't have to be a travesty. We know he's going to be a limited scoring. But they guarded him like a scorer. It's not like they gave him 6-7 feet and played ball screens different. Like he was still.
Yeah, they still respected the space.
So it's like, I don't know. It just is what it is.
I think it was one of those things that you did something different. So if it didn't go well, it was going to be the focus of the ire, right? Yeah. Like that's sort of how these things go. If you make a change, doesn't go the way people want, it's going to be, that's the thing people are going to focus on, right? But I don't know. I have a really hard time with this particular Nebraska team because I don't think they're as bad as the 5-game losing streak, right?
So you know what? Like that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I hope that's what people are frustrated with, but that's not what I hear. I hear that we've kind of resigned ourselves to this.
Just not being very good.
Going back to this roster.
Yeah.
They're better. I'm telling you.
Like it's the same team that was 12-2.
They're better. And so now we get schedule and non-con talk, which I think is ridiculous. But anyway, I'm not even going to go there. We just have to they're better than they're performing in this 5-game stretch. So if you're frustrated, be frustrated at that.
Sure, yeah.
You like I think that should be.
I can't remember who we were talking to. It was I think either Shafe or BC from Husker 24/7. And
probably Shafe, man. That dude is a huge basketball fan.
I asked them, hey, they're not good enough defensively to hang their hat on that. They're not good enough offensively to hang their hat on that. What does that then look like? And they said it means your margin of error is really thin. And that's the case. That's what's true for this team. If they're not really locked in defensively like they weren't in the second half, then things are going to be able to get away from you. Like, you don't have a ton of room for error. Going to Creighton, like you were talking about earlier, Creighton's pretty similar in that sense. They don't have a lot of room for error. Now, they've started giving themselves a little bit more because they've started locking in defensively in a way they weren't earlier in the season. But
and I think they showed you over this weekend they have more margin than you think.
yes, they do. But especially earlier in the season, Creighton had almost no margin for error because some of those guys hadn't gotten comfortable in roles, right? Jemiah Neal looks dramatically more comfortable in his role than he did a month ago or 2 months ago, right? Nebraska is not at a point where they have a ton of margin for error yet. And when you lose focus for just a second in conference play, that gets away from you. We saw it with Iowa. They lost focus for just a second, and that thing got away from them. Like Purdue, I'm not sure they ever had focus, right? But the Iowa, the Rutgers, and the USC games, and Maryland too, are all pretty similar in the sense of Nebraska has to stay locked in all the entire game. They don't have the luxury of going through these bad spurts, right? They don't have the offensive firepower to overcome it, and they don't have the defensive, whether it's rim protection or super athletic wings to lock guys up. They don't have that physical fallback defensively to not be super locked in all the time. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here, because I do think this team is better than their 5-game losing streak. They're probably not as good as a 12-2 start. It's probably somewhere in the middle, right? But where does that leave you? Where does that leave you with, what, 10, 12 games left in the regular season? I don't know. That's still, because I don't know if this is going to continue, the underachieving, or if they'll be able to find some equilibrium on the way out.
Like, I don't want to just dumb it down to like the actual hard number, but generally speaking, like, at what point is 5 of 24 not a roster issue? That's my question. So you have to be, when you're going to have these kind of conversations, and you're in the solutions business. No, I'll tell you, listen, sometimes people just want to bitch to be bitching, or they don't really know what they're talking about, and so you just kind of grab headlines and you're like, oh, I don't really pay attention, but I want to say a bunch of things. Like, at what point is 5 of 24 not a roster issue? I get it, because you may come back and if you said to me, you're like, man, damn, DB, like, they need more shooters. And I'd be like, oh, okay, you're probably right. Somebody other than a Sejan has to be a little more consistent from behind the arc, or maybe it's Bryce. And I wouldn't say but I would say Nebraska needs to understand how to play to their strengths too when it comes to shot selection.
That's where I would have gone, shot selection.
Okay, so like, I completely understand you want them to have another shooter. But at some point early on, like even when it's at home, when Gary has better stats, like he can't just be shooting threes on that possession or two when your margin of error is that small.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And and here, like, I'm not blaming JG because, I mean, without him, they're not in that game.
Sure, but that's a good example.
But that's an
of
example
shot,
of what that's an example of what I'm talking about.
I mean, Berkay. Let's use Berkay for an example. Guy goes 0 for 3 from 3-point range. He goes 3 for 3 on twos. He hasn't shot the ball well. There's really no indication that he's going to shoot the ball well, even if he's capable.
And he's hard to guard without fouling. So, like,
why would you give people the out?
Like,
it's a free out.
Somebody asked me, was it on DM? Man, I should find it, but I get buried. Somebody was asking me the difference between like freedom to play without restriction versus, hey, listen, this is what you do. You need to be doing this.
Sure.
Right?
Freedom is never like all encompassing.
And we just
for almost anybody.
We just heard a great coach yesterday. And we'll talk to Goatney or Coatney. I called him Goatney sometimes. I did that during our players' banquet. I called one of our players out loud in front of the parents what I call him because he's that in my phone. And everybody thought that was like the funniest dumb thing ever. I'm like, I'm sorry, that's who he is in my phone. I'd like to get that back. I don't call him daddy.
Just reel it back in.
Say what you got to say.
It was cute. It was Quentin.
Yeah.
And I call him cute daddy because he acts like he's 60.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's like we just heard Amy say, hey, you know, I'm not one of our philosophy when we're in practice. She's empowering her players. right? So she's not. She said something to the effect of, "It's not like I say, ooh, it's not a bad shot. It's if you're going to take that shot within the confines of our offense, let's get better at it."
Mm-hmm.
That is a very fine line, and you have to have tremendous command of your what's that
Program.
your space,
Okay.
because it can get away from you in a hurry.
Yeah, for
Right?
sure. Especially if you don't walk that line correctly.
Yeah. But it's like if we're in practice and we're going through cowboy passing period or something, and everything's a shot play.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're like, we probably should just play a little more catch. Let's check it down a little so we don't hold the ball so long.
Sure.
But you're not gonna say, "Hey, don't bang that skinny," right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's open, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's this thing. But if I'm like Berke or like, how would you guard that guy without fouling?
He's super awkward.
But you have to
Like in a
tell
good way.
him to play that way,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and there's
or let take Twice as Nice or Bryce.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't go 14 minutes without shooting a field goal.
Yeah, that's not feasible.
You know what I mean? But do you say, "Hey, man, shoot the ball"?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure they might. They may say to Mia, like, he has to be maddening.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes you just want to look at Brax. You just want to be like, "Hey, B-Rax, got to be tougher. You're going to be okay.
You're big. I need you to play big.
I need you to be this."
Yeah.
And just kind of see. So I think we can make some of these sweeping judgments about holes in the roster, what they can't do. I think now you got to really zero in and say, okay, we gotta guys, we tried it the other way. We're very capable. Let's get back to defining who and what we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard in the middle of a
skid.
A skid.
Yeah.
Because morale starts to creep
Becomes
in.
existential a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it doesn't. You don't have to resign yourself to it. You don't, man. I just watched a team play in Evanston last night,
mm-hmm.
and yes, they have my attention because I do think they're capable, and also I'm curious to see if I can figure out Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not everybody doesn't have to resign themselves to what they have been.
Sure.
You can be something different.
Yeah.
Like you can.
Yeah.
And so I'm not.
I
think they got to help themselves. I get it. They're exhausting. It's an exhausting program.
Yeah, it's a tough program to follow sometimes.
But they can get out of this. I'm telling you.
I think there's a thing in players' minds where, and this is really it's really difficult to break them of. Just because you can make that shot doesn't mean you should take that shot. There's a really big difference there.
I think that's the biggest issue on offense, mm-hmm. in my opinion, is quality shot selection.
Like, just because you can make that shot, does that mean it's the best thing you do for us?
And
right?
I said this a couple of weeks ago. I think somebody jumped on me. It might have been my man, Kobe Bean. When he was like, "Man, Asijan made 4 threes, like, and you're worried about shot selection." And I was like, and I admitted, I'm like, "Hey, I get it."
Mm-hmm.
On the surface, that doesn't sound. It sounds kind of like a dumb thing to say, but in a one possession game with, 24 seconds left on the shot clock, I probably don't shoot those 2 threes.
Yeah,
I'm just.
Sometimes you have to take that shot in context of what it is.
Yeah, I'm not saying.
Oh, I'll take 4 for 10 or 4 for 11.
Yeah, because that's a deal at practice or in a game where you're saying you're not telling that guy don't shoot a 3. You just have to be cognizant of
time and score
situation.
Time and score. Yeah, like
and it happened. It happened a handful of times.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot.
And I'm like, and I'm not just talking about Asijan because
no, with this team in general.
I'm like, ooh, that's not.
Not a good time for that.
That's not,
not a good time for that.
Just not, especially in kind of a pendulum, a metronome kind of.
Felt like
back
it was very
forth.
fragile.
Right.
The game was.
Yeah, and what happened was you would let SC kind of off the hook
because their shot selection was also terrible.
It's not good.
Horrifying.
It's like, I mean,
Horrifying. I wanted to throw Yates out a window.
Yeah, so
Frustrating.
You know the interesting thing about him?
What's that?
You have to kind of probably let him go because without inserting him into the lineup after the injury, like you need
No,
him
I get they need him
to kind of play like that.
He's one of those you don't get this life without me in it.
Yeah.
But then they need him in it.
Yeah.
Right? But as a person who just likes quality basketball, I want to throw him out a window.
It's like
it's the price you pay because you need his skill set if you're USC.
You just inexplicably can't allowing a team to go 6 of 12 in one half from three that shoots 35% as a team after going over in the first half. I'm gonna tell you, that's a dialed in issue. That's not a roster issue. And that's not to say that they don't have holes in the roster.
Yeah.
Just don't resign yourself to that because you still have games to go play.
Yeah.
You got to play within it.
Yeah, I mean, go look at Rutgers, right? Not a roster issue. Good players. Not very good basketball team, right? Like it's not you can't just get better talent and think all this goes away.
Yeah.
That's why it's not a roster issue.
It's an interesting phenomenon. Number one, I wasn't picking up what he was putting down. But now that I got it, I think he's on to something. Because it's a weird word to throw around, but I'm going to use it because the team did.
Okay.
And the coaching staff did. So my man Kobe was talking about, he said, it's frustrating to have this team still be talking about toughness. And I was like, oh, yeah. I think I kind of know what they're talking about when they say this, because you're hearing players say it. Because quietly, nobody really wanted to call him out by name. But remember when Gary took the podium a couple games ago and he was talking about what we need to do, and then you watched him play, and then it was like, well, Gary, you got to do what you say. Don't just be that guy at the podium. And we heard guys would do their hits, or they would be on their podcasts and they would say things like, well, we got to be – everybody has to be accountable for who they need to be on this team. You got to step up. You can't just talk it. You got to be it. I think they were kind of talking about Gary to some degree because he had laid a couple of eggs on the road. Just my feel for kind of – because it could only be Gary or Bryce, right? Because you have two kind of guys.
Yeah.
And when you say you need them to be who they say they're going to be. So I think the other thing, when those guys speak and they're talking about things like toughness, it's not necessarily don't confuse effort and toughness. We lump them we're a big ET school.
Yeah.
Big ET school. All we ever talk about is effort and toughness. And we define each clearly.
And differently.
And they are different.
Yeah.
You need them both. But they are two different things. And so sometimes if I'm talking about Mia willing to get fouled or stand in and take one, or sometimes it's something as subtle in QI roll, but coaches will vibe with me. If we hit Mac up right now, he'd be like, yeah, I'm telling you. If you take a charge or you give a foul and you go to the ground, there's something about being the first one up off the ground.
Yeah.
There just is. There's something about if you get knocked into the media, photog section, there's something about hopping back up.
Yeah.
There's something about getting knocked to the ground on one end and sprinting back to the other. There just is. There's this psychological game, especially when you're at the crib. When you're at the house and you got to defend your yard. You don't see these yard dogs that kind of mope around. Real yard dogs guard their yard. They just do. There's a manner in which they carry themselves. You don't have any, cropped-eared, slouched-eared, droop-eared dogs ready to defend their yard. You know what I mean? So there's something about getting off the hardwood or taking a foul, or when you're in the post and you're dribbling your brains out. Don't do something cute. Play through guys. Play into guys. Like, be willing to get out of your own comfort zone. Let's say you're a finesse guy. Like, if I'm Berke, and don't settle for a 3. You're capable, but when you're putting it on the ground, you're good with both the ground. You're putting it on the deck. You're good with both hands. Like, be willing to get hammered.
Yeah.
Because there's something to that. I cheer for an extremely soft team, right? And I know I've just seen it, right? If you're not, because people will they sense it. They sense it.
If you're soft, they'll smell it.
They sense that, you know what, they're not really about that life. And you just said a month ago that this team was going to be built on defensive-minded toughness. Then you have to exude it,
and they don't right now.
You don't. You got to be willing to get knocked over.
Not
you have
everybody,
to be willing to give a hard foul. You
But
have to be willing.
Then you have to be willing to get back up.
You know what I mean?
That's the key, right?
So I think that's what people are talking. I think that's what the
toughness
team is talking about when guys and Coach Hoiberg reference toughness at the podium.
So there's a couple things there that you brought up that kind of made alarm bells go off in my mind. Number one, I do think, yes, Bryce and Juwan need to be who they have to be. But I also think when they say things like that, of like, hey, people need to be what they're about, part of it is like the Bearcats of the world being like, hey, yes, I can make this shot. That doesn't mean that's the best shot for what this team needs from me.
Yeah.
Right. Or if I'm, and that applies to Juwan too, right? Like, yes, you maybe shoot it a little bit better at home. Is that the best thing your team needs from you?
Like sometimes I think Bryce just has to be willing to go get fouled.
Yeah.
You know, like he's one of those guys, and he's such a good foul shooter.
Yeah, if he should shoot 8 to 10 free throws a game.
And it can minimum.
Yeah, like bare minimum.
Like
he's got to go get it.
Just get fouled. And what it does is it lets overtime stuff like that is demoralizing.
That's exactly the word I was going to use, because you understand that you can't stay in front of him without fouling.
Yeah.
And then then he gets by you more. But to the other thing that made the alarm bells go off in my head, so you're talking about kind of this, and people think it's overrated, but kind of this mentality of like, just get back up, be the first one up, it's not just
it ain't overrated
for them, although it is for them too, but it's also for you. If you keep getting up, you convince yourself you're okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's as much internally as externally, but it matters externally too, because it made me the thing that is super, super random. I'm a weird, like, George Foreman, Muhammad Ali fan. Mm-hmm. And there's a fight in the rope-a-dope fight. He keeps George Foreman does this great interview where he keeps saying that Muhammad Ali is sitting on the ropes and just getting pummeled, right? And he keeps asking him, "Is that all you got, George? Is that all you got, George?" And at a certain point, George literally thinks to himself,
he caved. He's like, "This man ain't human."
He said, "Yeah, that's about it."
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right? That's a real thing. Like, if that's happening to George Foreman, like one of the best boxers and one of the best athletes and one of the toughest sports of all time in boxing, against one of the best of all time, if that can happen to him, then it can certainly happen to a basketball team, right?
I told our guys, regardless, this goes all the way back to 05, and now it's come so far with like the mental approach to the game. Mm-hmm. Just been around a lot of other smarter people that we do this thing called a power pose or whatever, and the gist of it is you don't show fatigue. Mm-hmm. And I would always say, like coaching, and Alvin would do this in practice too with hoops and stuff. When you get back, when you sprint back, and they can see your eyes, there's just something about how that wears on teams that want to push it down your throat.
100%.
Right? Or when you don't show you're tired. My favorite is even when we muddle huddle as a defense, I'm always like, hey, let's get the call in so we're ready. Mm-hmm. There's just something about when other teams break the huddle
and you're already
ready to go.
I mean,
there's something about Christian was really, really good at this. Mm-hmm. Like if he would get knocked on his rear end, you watch him hop up off the ground. Mm-hmm. Like he would just, I coached a guy, Jason Martin. He was never going to be the last one on the ground. Mm. And the more people you play against that are like that, it just does something to you over time. Mm. And the crowd was lit, right? They're super engaged. And then like guys will get on the floor or they'll get knocked over, and it's like ride that energy that you're getting in the
Use
booth.
it.
Get up.
Use it.
Those are the kinds of things that demoralize teams on the road that aren't sure whether they should be there.
Another example, weirdly enough, boxing again. You know the exact moment Deontay Wilder's career ended? When Tyson Fury came back from the dead.
Yeah.
He was never the same after that because the dude got up.
Like, what the?